friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about women with power in Matilda and the Witches by Roald Dahl. Earlier this year I did a day of vlogging, a day of Dahl, where I read as many books by Roald Dahl as I could from a box set, and I started to notice similar recurring themes. And two of the books that I read, or started at least, during the day of Dahl were The Witches and Matilda. Both of these books have women with power in them. I want to talk a little bit about what the representation of these women says to me as a reader. Now, I'm interested specifically in the adult women. I think Matilda is a young person with power, and I think that's a little bit different because she's in a different place in her life. But I want to talk about the witches, who are adults, and I want to talk about Miss Trunchbull, who is an adult as well. Before we get into this, I'm going to say spoilers for both texts, little plot synopsis for each. So The Witches is about a young boy whose parents died, who is living with his grandmother, who tells him about witches. Witches are women who are basically out to destroy children. And they don't look like other women. There are certain things that you can use to spot a witch, and the grandmother teaches these to the boy. Then they go on holiday and they're in a hotel. So basically this boy is dicking around in a conference room with his mice who he wants to train to be a circus, and all of these ladies start pouring in, and he figures, oh, ladies are nice, I'll be totally fine here because I'm a kid and ladies love kids. And then all of the witches start discarding their performative femininity, and he discovers he's in a room full of witches, and these witches have a master plan to destroy all of the world's children. So then in Matilda we have the story of a young genius child. Her parents are not great parents. They don't value education. They really love their television, and they generally just ignore her and her desire to learn. And so she seeks knowledge at the library. She teaches herself to read, and then eventually she ends up going to Trunchbull Academy, I believe. Very subtle, which is run by Miss Trunchbull. She's the head teacher. So Matilda is at this school and she's being taught by Miss Honey, who is like the lowest grade teacher, kindergarten, I don't know, whatever you have in the UK. She's being taught by Miss Honey, and Miss Honey is blown away by Matilda's academic genius and is like, hey, this kid needs to be challenged. Within a couple of years, we could easily have her at like a university, like reading and comprehension level. Like, she needs to be challenged. Miss Trunchbull is of course like, I don't agree with this. Then we learn that Miss Trunchbull is Miss Honey's aunt and is just being evil and devious and possibly murdered Miss Honey's father for his house and all of his nice things. And of course in the end the Trunchbull is scared away. Miss Honey gets her house, and like the will is found, and Miss Honey is found as the rightful owner, and for reasons, her parents, Matilda's parents, have to run away from the crime life that they have been leading, and Matilda is just given to Miss Honey. I think what's interesting about both is that the women with power in both books don't perform normative femininity. In The Witches we learn that, quote, real witches dress in ordinary clothes and look very much like ordinary women. They live in ordinary houses and they work in ordinary jobs. And we learn that on page 1 of The Witches. We're also told that, quote, a witch is always a woman, end quote. Page 3. Quote, what makes her doubly dangerous is the fact that she doesn't look dangerous, end quote. Also page 3. And then we're given things to look out for to identify a witch, and this is across page 18 to 26 in my edition. So they have claws, they're bald, they have sores, they have big nostrils, they hate the smell of children, they have no toes, and they have blue spit. None of these characteristics, I would say, are part of heteronormative female beauty standards. So we see that the witches perform heteronormative femininity in order to move in the world and enact their plans to destroy children. So stereotypically speaking, women's role is that of the domestic, right? Women are supposed to mother and care for children, and the witches perform this outwardly. They hide these defying characteristics that mark them as other, and they use their performance of normative femininity in order to get into spaces where children are and prey on them. I want to read to you this chapter from The Witches. Quote, "The first thing I noticed about this woman was her size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4.5 feet tall. She looked quite young. I guess she was about 25 or 26, and she was very pretty. She had on a rather stylish long black dress that reached right to the ground, and she wore black gloves that came up to her elbows. Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat." So see, we have this head witch is performing normative femininity. She's small, she doesn't take up a lot of space, she looks young. Youth is currency, right? Like, if we think about whose bodies are valuable, it's young women's bodies. Who is sexualized, who has sexual power in the media, what sells things, it's young women and young women's bodies. So youth has value. And she was pretty. Your attractiveness, a woman's attractiveness has value. We often hear studies about attractive people or people who fit what is considered stereotypically attractive in society. Those folks often are promoted. They often have higher wages, right? Like, there is bias and there is value in being seen as stereotypically attractive. And she's stylish. She dresses nice. She's not frumpy or I guess unstylish, right? She clearly cares about her clothing, which is something that women are supposed to do. So let me continue. "She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she couldn't possibly not be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up on their platform? And why, for heaven's sakes, were all the other witches gazing at her with such a mixture of adoration, awe, and fear?" Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloved fingers unhook something behind her ears, and then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it carefully upon a small table nearby. And when she turned around again and faced us, I very nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I had ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizened, so shrunken and shriveled, it looked as though it had been pickled in vinegar. It was a fearsome and ghastly sight. There was something terribly wrong with it, something foul and putrid and decayed. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges, and in the middle of her face, around the corners of her cheeks, I could see the skin all cankered and worm-eaten, as though maggots were working away in there. There are times when something is so frightful you become mesmerized by it and can't look away. I was like that now. I was transfixed. I was numbed. I was magnetized by the sheer horror of this woman's features. But there was more to it than that. There was the look of serpents in those eyes of hers as they flashed around the audience. I knew immediately, of course, that this was none other than the Grand High Witch herself. I also knew why she had worn a mask. She could never have moved around in public, let alone book a hotel, with her real face. Everyone who saw her would have run away screaming. So we see, again, the idea that, stereotypically speaking, women have to perform. They have to put on a face in order to move in the world. There are certain office spaces where it is expected of you to come to work with a certain amount of makeup. Spaces online, if you are on camera, you're expected to present yourself in a certain way, and to come in without your face, to come in without this mask that is expected of you. Generally, it seems to be somewhere in the middle of no makeup and excessive makeup, which is also not acceptable. You have to appear, my wrist doesn't turn the other way right now, you have to appear naturally beautiful, naturally awake and wide-eyed. So you have to put on this mask in order to be successful in these spaces, in order to be like considered put together and showing up for your job. And so this witch, to move in the world, to have power over the humans that she's interacting with, has to wear a mask. It is a complete normative beauty mask. Her real face is not young. She doesn't have the power of youth. She doesn't even have the power of like aliveness. She's so not youthful, she is rotting, right? I think that's interesting. And then let's continue. "The doors," shouted the Grand High Witch in a voice that filled the room and bounced on the walls. "Are they chained and bolted?" "The doors are chained and bolted, your grandness," answered a voice in the audience. The brilliant snake's eyes that were set so deep in that dreadful, rotting, worm-eaten face glared unblinkingly at the witches who sat facing her. "You may remove your gloves," she shouted. Her voice, I noticed, had that same hard metallic quality as the voice of the witch I had met under the conker tree, only it was far louder and much harsher. It rasped. It grated, it snarled, it scraped, it shrieked, and it growled. And I think these are especially interesting markers because a lot of young women are critiqued for vocal fry. Which I just did just there unintentionally. It's the rasping at the end of sentences. There is a lot of discussion around vocal fry in young women because it's something that it's a quality to men's voices. When your sentences go down at the end, it adds gravitas. It makes what you're saying have respect or authority, opposed to when you uptalk and all of your sentences go up at the end. People don't take you as seriously, which is a whole sexist can of worms in and of itself that I don't have time to get into here today, but it's interesting to me that this Grand High Witch, her voice seems to be full of vocal fry. It's raspy, it's deep, it's powerful. Her voice has power. Her voice has masculine qualities that vocal fry feature that we like in men. So then we continue. "Everyone in the room was peeling off her gloves. I was watching the hands of those in the back row. I wanted very much to see what their fingers looked like and whether my grandmother had been right. Ah! Yes, I could see several of them now. I could see the brown claws curving over the tips of fingers. They were about 2 inches long, those claws, and sharp at the ends. Again, well-manicured nails, depending on where you are, what you're doing. There are certain normative feminine beauty standards, like budgeting. Like, I bought a budget planner recently, and one of the things that is left in the budget, like it's a preset feature of this budget, is nails. It's expected that a large majority of female customers purchasing this budget plan are going to be spending money each month on having their nails professionally done. And these witches don't subscribe to that either. They wear gloves and they say, fuck it, I'm gonna have really long, brown, curling nails. We continue. "You may remove your shoes," barked the Grand High Witch. I heard a sigh of relief from all of the witches in the room as they kicked off their narrow, high-heeled shoes. Again, high heels is something that is going away but is expected in a lot of office places. It's something that I struggle with because whenever I wear heels, end up with knee and back pain. The hardest part of taking ballroom dancing with my partner is wearing the heeled ballroom dancing shoes. Yes, there are like flat granny shoes. They're not very sexy, first of all, but also that the high heel shoe is important in that it puts you balanced, like it tips your balance in a certain way. And the high heels have been a nightmare. I am a running shoe person, not even a tennis shoe person, because those don't have good support if you're going to be on your feet all day. I am a running shoe person, and I know full well that when I am wearing certain clothing, having like a clunky athletic shoe on the bottom is not sexy. It took a lot to be like, no, I would rather not have knee and back pain and like look a little silly. Right? Like, it took a lot to get there. The high heel thing is real, and I mean, if you are in a professional office setting and you know, you're dressed professionally, you're wearing a pantsuit, you're wearing a skirt and like tights, and you put on running shoes, it just doesn't look as professional, and that look is often important in how people perceive you from first glance, right? So like these witches, they are kicking off their high-heeled shoes And, quote, then I got a glimpse under the chairs of several pairs of stockinged feet, square and completely toeless. Revolting they were, as though toes had been sliced away from the feet with a carving knife. Then the women removed their wigs. Quote, there now appeared in front of me row upon row of bald female heads, a sea of naked scalps, every one of them red and itchy looking from being rubbed by the linings of the wigs. I simply cannot tell you how awful they were, and somehow the whole sight was made more grotesque because underneath those frightful scabby bald heads the bodies were dressed in fashionable and rather pretty clothes. It was monstrous. It was unnatural. End quote. And I think that's interesting too, because one of the things that I think is really valued is hair. It's so hard for women. I myself have very, very thin hair, and it has been an embarrassment, especially when it has fallen out. When I get stressed or sick, I lose it by the handful, and it's like, you'll pull your hair back in a ponytail and there are like bald spots. What is sexy, like historically and still in contemporary times, where you see people getting hair extensions and like paying mass amounts of money for the facade of thick hair. I am so jealous of folks with thick hair, but like that's one of those things that like it's been instilled in me that having hair is part of and having long hair is part of youthfulness. It's part of sexiness. It's part of like sex appeal. And I know one of my friends is queer, and one of the like life-changing moments for her was actually shaving her head. Not cutting her hair short, which she had done before, but shaving it completely and like connecting her identity and her like sexiness and her confidence from her hair. Like, I've often joked like, oh, I should probably shave my head and just get over the fact that like basically my hair is jumping ship. But I can't do it. And I think this is the reason, the fact that women without hair is still seen as something monstrous. Folks with short hair, folks with shaved heads is a statement. It's powerful for the individual, but it's also changing how the public interact with you, because there is so much value placed on the connections between long, thick hair and beauty, and then there is power and privilege tied into that stereotypical beauty. I think what we see in The Witches is interesting because these women have power. They are defying stereotypical female roles. They are not lovers, wives, and mothers. We could perhaps do a queer reading of these witches. There are no male witches. So where do these witches find companionship? Probably with each other. We just have a big group of gay ladies who don't marry and who don't want kids so actively that they come up with a plan to turn children into mice so that their parents will then murder them. I guess what it does is aligns women with power with masculinity, because it would be perfectly acceptable for men to not groom themselves, for men to not be the most fashionable, for men to not want a partner or a child, in a way that still for women it is seen as a little bit odd for you to not want to marry, to prioritize your career, to not want children. I think we see a aligning of power with masculinity. And we also see the ways in which performing heteronormative, stereotypical femininity as a way to pass easily through society and access certain things. Like, these witches have to perform heteronormative femininity in order to exist in communities, in order to have access to children, in order to book hotels for their child murdering convention, right? Similarly, with Miss Trunchbull, we have a woman who is also very masculine in presentation. On page 60, we get this description of her. Quote, "The head teacher, the boss, the supreme commander of Cruncham Hall was a formidable middle-aged lady whose name was Miss Trunchbull." So if we look at the language there, head teacher, I'm sort of neutral towards that, like principal. If I'm thinking about this, if we were to say like principal, which is the word that we would use for head teacher in Canada, in my mind, connect principal with man, because most of the principals I encountered in my education were men, and my mind just goes principal man, even though that's totally bullshit. But head teacher still makes me think woman, because teacher makes me think woman. There's a whole can of worms of language association bullshit that I have been indoctrinated with. Head teacher doesn't have that masculine connotation for me, but the boss, the supreme commander, definitely do. Again, if we go to language having power, it's like that riddle where a child gets in an accident and like one parent takes them in and one parent performs the surgery on them, but both of them are there. And like the assumption that you are making is that the surgeon is the child's father because you associate surgeon with man, but really the twist is both parents are there because the surgeon is a woman. The words that are used to describe Miss Trunchbull are words that I think most people will associate with men. Also, her name, like in children's lit, name has power. Think Cornelius Fudge, the Good Times minister, versus Scrimgeour, the wartime minister, right? Like, names have power in children's literature. And so Trunchbull, like, it has that ch, it has harsh sounds in it. Trunchbull, it sounds aggressive, it sounds violent, compared to Miss Honey, right? The young, beautiful teacher, who's like her counterpart who we're comparing her to. Trunchbull is a really aggressive sounding name. Let's also talk about the fact that Miss Trunchbull is described as middle-aged. She is not young, she is not youthful, she does not have that currency of youth and sex appeal. She is middle-aged. So, you know, she's past her prime. Nobody wants her. Her body, her sexuality, her womb doesn't have value, whether or not she wants it to. Then on page 76 to 77, we learn that the Trunchbull is not head teacher because she particularly cares about children or the value of educating children and like giving kids the best chance in life. She is just, quote, a most formidable female, a famous athlete. She has muscles in evidence. She has powerful legs. She's not pretty. She has, quote, an obstinate chin, a cruel mouth, and small, arrogant eyes, and her clothes were extremely odd. So we know that she does not, like the witches in her natural state, she does not conform to normative femininity. She is not stereotypically attractive. She does not value performing normative femininity. Rather, she leans really hard into her masculine qualities in order to occupy this position of power. She doesn't have a nurturing side. She doesn't care about kids at all. Pretty sure she cares about the power trip and the paycheck. She gets a real giggle out of whipping kids and locking them in the chokey. Her power comes from her aggression and her masculine qualities. Arguably, the Trunchbull is deemed dangerous because her performance of gender does not ascribe to the natural order of things. If we want to go back to like the high school idea, like with Shakespeare, when the natural order of things is disturbed, everything goes wrong. And by the end, we need that balance to be restored, right? The Trunchbull is dangerous because she defies this role, in the same way that the witches are dangerous because they defy that normative role. On page 79, we learn that Miss Trunchbull hardly ever speaks in a normal voice. She either barks or shouts, like the witches, who growl and snarl. She has this animalistic quality to her voice. And note that she doesn't, like Hermione in the Harry Potter series, she doesn't bark, right? If we're thinking about the types of animals that Hermione often sounds like, it's like birds, or like small animals. She'll squeak like a mouse. In contrast, the Trunchbull barks. Barking is associated with dogs, right? Dogs are more powerful animals than mice. If we think about the witches who snarl and growl, I'm thinking big cats or dogs. Again, not squeaking. So the animals that these powerful women are linked with in terms of animals are powerful animals. They're aggressive animals. They're predators. They're not prey. So there is a danger in the way that they speak even. We also learn that the Trunchbull believes that girls are nasty things. Girls are, quote, dirty, nasty things, and she's glad she never was one, end quote, on page 80. She seems to reject this girlishness, and given that youth has value, youth has, I mean, basically everything that women are trying to do with stereotypical femininity is to make themselves look youthful. You make your eyes look big with mascara and eyeliner and tricks with eyeshadow to give you that youthful doe-eyed Bambi look. Even hair removal, the removal of hair from women's bodies, it's making the body look prepubescent, because it's only once women hit puberty that they really develop body hair to speak of. And so removing it is a return to this girlishness. Everything about stereotypical femininity, stereotypical beauty standards is about kind of this weird, like, Lolita-esque performance of youth. And that the Trunchbull rejects girlishness. She thinks they are nasty. On the one hand, it's devaluing girlishness and the power that young people have, but it's a rejection of what is deemed valuable by society, which is female youth and all of that performative femininity that goes along with it. It's interesting that the Trunchbull rejects that way that women can have power. She doesn't lean into this youthful feminine performance. She rejects it entirely and goes for a very masculine performance in order to have power. So I think it's interesting and worth thinking about the fact that the villains in both of these pieces by Dahl reject stereotypical femininity. They reject the callings and the power of sexiness and youth in exchange for taking on more masculine, or if not masculine, unfeminine performances of gender in order to have power. And in rejecting the feminine, they are positioned as dangerous. They don't fit the role that women are expected to fit. They are not lovers, wives, or mothers. They outwardly endanger children. They completely reject that domestic caregiver mother role. And in doing so, they are villains. They are dangerous. You could read this either way. I haven't really taken a position. I feel like you could argue that these women are like really badass and powerful because they reject these things, but I don't think the text wants us to feel that way, right? Like the text positions these women as villains and we're not rooting for them to succeed. The folks with power, the folks who succeed, especially in Matilda, the folks who succeed are women who take on that stereotypical female role. By the end of the novel, Matilda doesn't have her magic powers anymore. She doesn't have her telekinetic powers because her brain is being challenged academically, and so she doesn't have this supernatural power. She is like a good, obedient student. Similarly, Miss Honey, who performs very normative femininity throughout the text. She is young, she is beautiful, we know that she doesn't eat, so she stays thin. She lives a very simple domestic life in a barn without any running water or like conveniences. Miss Honey, in her performance and like her martyrdom almost, is rewarded with her father's wealth, and she's rewarded with a built-in family in that she gets to adopt Matilda and become a mother to her. I don't know, I have really mixed feelings because on the one hand, Matilda is a fascinating and badass character, and I would love to do a reading of just Matilda and compare Matilda as a child with power to Carrie from Stephen King, another young person with power. But like, women in Dahl, I don't think are super great. Even though Matilda is this like interesting character, I think women in Dahl's body of works, I mean, in the Day of Dahl, we explored how women were always fainting and very stereotypical, or just not characters. Like the number of boy protagonists, it's rare that we have a female protagonist, so it's interesting that Matilda has this power, and I think it's worth unpacking as well, but adult women in Dahl's texts are not well represented, and I want to say kinda sexist. Or maybe go out there like fully and say that like it's pretty fucking sexist. That's where I'm at with adult women with power in Roald Dahl's texts. I would love to know your thoughts on adult women with power in children's literature in the comments down below. What does that do to young readers to only see powerful women defying roles, being subversive, positioned as villains? This video was made possible by my patrons. I really appreciate the work that you are enabling me to do. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye.